I'm very privileged to be here, and as always, you know, when you get the call, all sorts of things happen. But I got up early today, and I'm here, and I'm very pleased to be here. But it won't be exactly about families, because when I looked at it, it links in. My talk links in very well with what has gone before, so that's okay. I'm looking forward to the following discussions. I think my task is very, very clear. That's what I wanted to say first of all. It's very, very clear that I think I'm a spoke of a wheel. I don't have to be the wheel itself. I have to be as good a spoke as possible, because throughout the day we're going to make the wheel. That's one of the key things. I think my main aim really is to look at the history and the form of negativity, which is going to link in quite well. The use of language, again, which Nigel touched on. Well, he did a good job, actually. I was going to touch on it. He did a good job. And a continuing physical and theoretical struggle to try and redress both of those sort of issues, really. And I'm going to try and look at it through the themes in my co-edited book, Black Families as a Site of Struggle. And hopefully you should have that leaflet is floating around somewhere. And I've got 4 books with me as well. Well, everyone started off with who they are and who am I. I'll go through a list of quick things of who I am, which will add to what Patricia said. I'm a freelance researcher, community activist, consultant, archivist. I'd like to be an archivist, and I'm trying to get involved in saving black archives, particularly local archives. I've got interest in education, arts, black families, and other social justice issues. Ex-lecturer, as was said, 10 years involvement in supplementary schools in Leeds. That was very rewarding. Black family researches in London with Exploring Parenthood, were now gone bust, and the National Step Family Association, again, have all gone down the pan. I was secretary of the Black Men's Forum, which was a local forum. That was about 10 years ago, when the issues of black men were coming forward to try and link in with the issues of black women. Co-editor of the book, as I've just said. Now, the recent issues that continue to place black families at the site of struggle has brought me here. Those are we say the riots. I want to take issue with that term, to be honest. Obviously, I look to Patricia and Junie, but I won't use the term riot. I use the term uprising or social uprising. I'm not interested in using the term riot. It's the same as saying slaves, but I use the term enslaved or enslaved Africans. It's about challenging those words. And the historical part is about challenging. You don't have to run with it. You can actually run against it. It's about gangs. It's about what happened with Mark Duggan. It's about people wearing hoodies. It's about the working class, underclass that was said before. It's this coded message of broken families. And it's not just broken families, it's broken black families. They're feckless. That word was mentioned before, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. It's that general black culture and the use of feral. The use of feral. Nigel mentioned the use of feral. But that I picked up on that straight away, the idea of feral. That's the first time feral has been linked with feckless as well. Feckless is another word. The first time I heard feral was in terms of using it in terms of someone who, I think it was someone in Australia. No, someone in Germany who was brought up, who didn't have contact with human beings. And it was called a feral child. But now it's being used in this context. I'll come back to feral in a minute. So it's feral youth, dysfunctional families. And you've also heard about Starkey and the fact that Bill Bratton from the USA arrived here on 10th of October. What the hell is he going to tell us about what's happening in this country? When we've got people who have been dealing with it for years, including one person sitting here, Professor Gus John. Now, selected use of language. The idea of feral, I looked it up. It's the feral, it's of animals and plant existing in a wild state, especially after being domestic or cultivated. It's from the Latin ferus, which means savage. Okay. Now, so you've got feral, you've got wild, you've got savage youth. It's uncultivated. Uncultivated means that it's outside of the cultivated program of our society. They're outside of our society. You come down the list, and feral equals black youth. That's what it equals. Feral equals black youth. Then you've got feckless. Feckless. Feckless is irresponsible and lacking character and determination. So again, you're outside of the people who are modest, who are careful and in thought and everything else. You have terms as immigrants. And immigrants, we know, equals blacks equal non-whites. I don't use the term immigrants, I use the term migrants. Okay? Now let me turn to, before I go, I was going to talk about the 19th century, because these things have a history, and it's the history that's brought us here. It's the history that's brought me here. We talk about the mob. The mob was a riotous or disorderly crowd, the masses, a gang of criminals. The mob were really feared, especially after the French Revolution. It was feared that mass would actually, anything about trade union, anything of people coming together, more than 5, it was actually feared. And the issue of the mob was particularly feared. And it was a negative connotation in the 19th century. Then we have the word hooligan, for instance. Hooligan. Come on to the word hooligan. I got this book in 1989. It was published in 1983. It's Hooligan, A History of Respectable Fears. Jeffrey Pearson, Professor Jeffrey Pearson. He was based at University of...
Bradford.
Oh, well, that was a long time ago. He's now at University of Bradford. Yeah, okay. So what he's trying to say is that he was writing about just before the 1981 uprising, and took 4 years. But what he's saying is that those fears have a history. Let me just read from it quickly if I can, because I think it's important, especially since particularly some of our younger, very bright and intelligent people, and people who look like me, still haven't read the literature, still don't actually, you can see, but you have to go beyond it. You have to go beyond it. Okay. The book came to but it's also a myth and tradition, the myth of British way of life, according to which, after centuries of domestic peace, remember this is in the 80s, the streets of Britain have been suddenly plunged into a natural state of disorder that betrays the stable traditions of the past. What I hope to show by contrast is that real traditions are quite different, that for generations Britain had been plagued by the same fears and problems as today, and that this is something which should require us to reassess the shape of our present difficulties and the prospects for the future. Let me just drop down. Hooliganism touches on the nerve of this confusion, because allied to the way in which the British, or I do mean English, style themselves as the most orderly nation on earth, when trouble and violence visit the streets as they do, there's a habitual tendency to disown this as un-British or un-English. It's not playing the game, it's not cricket, it's not so forth. At the moment, it's the black people who stand accused of disrupting the peaceful tradition of British way of life. And it has even found necessary to import an American word, mugging, that was when that mugging word came in, into the vocabulary in order to describe such an unheard of and un-English crime as street robbery. But the English have been blaming their violence on someone else for a century or more, and in the past, street crime and disorderly conduct have been fostered onto any number of alien influences: street Arabs, hot-headed ruffians, discharged foreign legions, Americanization, and so forth. Now, let me just get to the punchline. There isn't a punchline, but it is. If you read the book, what he's trying to say is that there is no golden period of peace where there wasn't street robberies and upheavals. During the 1920s and 30s, there were street robberies. All these things were happening. There were people who were being throttled, garroted, you know, in Victorian time. So we need to go back. Every time something happens today, always look back and see where things come from. So that's the first thing I wanted to get out of the way in terms of those coded messages and the languages. In terms of the book and the issues around the book took 3.5 years to work on. There are 15 chapters in there, and we deliberately worked on the book, looking at social policy, education, music, sports, social exclusion, racism, religion and spirituality. It was to try and correct some of dysfunctional issues around black families. That was very, very deliberate. There was nothing there that could actually do that. If you looked at the literature before that, you could see lots of American studies. When we put the proposal in and we were trying to tout it around, that's what people wanted us to do. Not just to look at the UK, they wanted to look at the whole world. Why don't you look at somewhere else? Why don't you look at the USA? Why don't you look at France? Why don't you look at this? No, we wanted to look at this tradition here of black families, of black people. We wanted to look at what was happening here. So it was deliberate to try and counter some of those issues. And there are 15 authors, all of African and African Caribbean descent. So they were literally, we wanted to make sure that those voices are heard. The same as our voices are being heard here today. They actually walk the walk. So there were academics, but there were also practitioners, but there were also community activists as well. In chapter 2, for instance, we had Dr. Franklin Smith talking about the history and profile of black people in Britain. He went through the old history in terms of the push and pull, what actually got us here. Sometimes people actually believe that it was just a question of people wanting to come here. But it was more than that. There was a pull issue. There was Enoch Powell, for instance, went to the Caribbean and directly recruited people to come to the UK. And I think came from the Caribbean directly into areas such as transport and nursing. You know, there were push-pull issues that were happening there. All those things are actually stratified and told. Bertha Oetsching in chapter 3 talks about the socialization of children to cope with a racist world. That's a theme that actually runs through the whole issue, in that we cannot, it's not just a question of passing on the method of coping in a society. That's what families are about. That's what communities are about. Communities give you the wherewithal to survive in that community. We have to do that, but there's another cutting edge which we have to put on that, is how once you step outside the door, that there's going to be racism. You might not see it straight away. It's not a question of actually trying to burden the young person with that, but you tell the stories. You try and equip them for when that happens. They're not knocked back completely. They're not destroyed. That's the issue. We don't want them to be destroyed. We have to give them that means to be able to cope with it. Sometimes you have to flee. Sometimes you have to stand and fight. But there are various strategies that you have to do. Sometimes the people that look the strongest, it is only skin deep. It means that they have not internalized the strength inside. So they might want to react in a very negative way. It's about getting that internal strength internally, and the method, the means of trying to cope with it. That's what black families have to do, and that's what we were trying to show in the book here. Tracy Reynolds in chapter 5 was looking at the racialization of mothering, in that some of the old issue that we had in terms of black families particularly being very frightened of approaching anyone outside of the family because of being blamed for not bringing up their children in a particular way. The issue of children being taken away, it's a very tight line. You want to protect children, but you should also understand that people bring up their children in different ways. Even within the European white community, there are very different ways of coping, of passing on knowledge, of talking about what it is that your community, your family is about. And they've always been very fearful that their means of their method would always be undermined. Thank you. Trevor Gordon did a very, very good chapter talking about rites of progress, rites of passage. The rites of progress and rites of passage, it's about getting access to the key issues of housing, education, and unemployment. Of course, some of those issues are why people actually are on the edge. I wouldn't say they're underclass, but they're on the edge anyway. My particular feeling is about talking about self-identity and how you actually try to create that self-identity. If I had more time, perhaps in the discussion, the issue of how self-identity has been deliberately undermined, but we have to recreate that self-identity and keep going. So I think that should give us some means of progress in terms of discussion. Those are the key issues I wanted to get across. The idea that it has a history, and we mustn't forget the history. The idea that the selected use of language, which goes back and forth, and also the issue of trying to fight around against it. Those are the issues I wanted to get across. Thank you very much. Thank you.